Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 13th of March 2014. My name's Chris Nitzo. Tonight we'll be talking about what you're seeing on screen here, which is Ex-Tropical Cyclone Gillian and its future. And it still has a bit of a future according to most of the model guidance. And then we'll be talking about the tropical depression around Vanuatu, which could be the remnants of Ex-Tropical Cyclone Hadi, and as it starts to track back towards the west and into the Coral Sea over the next week. Well, I guess when we start talking about Gillian, we can see that overall the track is expected to take her in a northwest, or take her in a northwest direction towards the northeastern top end coast here. Now the Bureau is still expected to become a Category 1, probably not tomorrow, but probably on Saturday. Expected to become a Category 1, a fairly weakish one at that, and pushing to the northwest and possibly hitting the coast somewhere in the vicinity of Gove or Nullumbai. Now when that happens, we're going to see some fairly heavy rain from the system. Really that's going to be its biggest danger, is the amount of heavy rain it could produce. It's not moving overly slowly, but it's not moving too quickly either. So there's a chance there that if you get under one of the rain bands of the system, you could be looking at 2 to 3, maybe even 400, but that's an outside chance. More around the 200, possibly even 300 millimeters in 24 hours if you get in under those rain bands and the system tracks at sort of 15 to 20 kilometers an hour. So I guess that's its biggest issue throughout the entire life cycle of this system, is the major amount of rain that could fall. Now it's expected to get on a new developing ridge, and that's why it's going to push to the northwest, and once it's over the top or to the north of that ridge, it's expected to push in a more west to west northwest direction through the entire northern top end coastline. And then once it gets off the coast of the northwestern top end, expected to move in a more west to west southwest direction. Now in the longer term, we're not expecting Gillian to hit the coast of WA. We do expect Gillian to reform into a pretty decent tropical cyclone once it gets off the WA coast or just south of Indonesia. But at no stage in its future life cycle is any of the model guidance suggesting that this system ends up hitting the Pilbara or Kimberley coastline. So unfortunately for those people that want the rain in the Pilbara and Kimberley, it's not going to come from this system according to our guidance at the moment. If we take a look at Ex-Tropical Cyclone Hadi, and Ex-Tropical Cyclone Hadi is now located, or is currently located a little bit further west than this pink area, around about the 165 degrees east mark. Now, Ex-Cyclone Hadi will continue moving in an east-southeasterly direction for another couple of days. So tomorrow it's expected to lie somewhere near Villa in the Vanuatu area. And then as we head to Saturday, it's expected to lie east of Villa, continuing to push in an easterly direction. Now normally we wouldn't even think twice about this system, but the fact is that around about Saturday it stops its eastward progression between 170 to 175 and then starts to push back to the west on Sunday. Now it is expected to then push back to the west indefinitely for the next week or so, just continuing to track west, 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 west throughout the whole period and back into our region by about day 5, which is Monday or Tuesday next week. We're expecting to see it back on the Australian radar, and then continuing to track even further to the west as we head to day 6, 7 and 8. Now whether it can get onto the coastline, we're not quite sure yet. But at this stage, at least a low pressure system is expected to push westwards across the Coral Sea next week. In saying that, from the Vanuatu Bureau of Meteorology, they do notice the low pressure system, Ex-Tropical Cyclone Hadi, there at 12 south, 164 east. It's going to move continuing to the east over the next couple of days. It's not expected to become a cyclone the next 5 days anyway, so the percentage chances are between 10 and 30% of the system actually becoming a cyclone at any stage in the next 5 days. So look folks, even though it's expected to push back to the west, not expected to be a cyclone as it does so. Now, there's nothing to say that in the longer term, when it's back into the Coral Sea, conditions don't improve for its development later, but at this point in time, the next 5 days at least, we can't see this being a cyclone. Thanks to Weather Zone. If we check out satellite imagery, that's it, by the way. All you wanted was just the overview, that was it. So if you want to stick around now, we'll get into a bit more nitty-gritty stuff. But if all you wanted to know was the overview, that was it. So now let's get into the real stuff here. We've got the monsoon trough through Indonesia and pushing eastwards towards Australia. It's very sporadic and broken. So we're currently in a fairly lull phase of the MJO, and so therefore we're not seeing widespread massive convection that we would normally associate with a monsoon. So it's a bit of a broken monsoon at the moment. As we head towards the NT Gulf region, we see that the ex-tropical cyclone Gillian is trying to get some convection going today, and it has done so over the worst part of the day. Normally cyclones can't get convection going this time of day, and so we've seen a fairly big effort there from the low pressure system to get some convection happening around its centre, although the centre lies a little bit to the west of the actual deep convection, so it is still being under the influence of some westerly wind shear there. So we can see also the Northern Territory coastline, the top end coastline, seeing some pretty good thunderstorm activity as well today. As we head further to the east over the Coral Sea, pretty sky clear over most of the Coral Sea. We do see a little bit more convection out here in the northeast Coral Sea, but you can see the amount of wind shear here. Just look at this convection just pushing, developing, and then pushing out here to the northeast very quickly. So it's all being sheared away very quickly. So there's no chance of a cyclone in the Coral Sea in the next few days. And the other reason there's no chance is there's a lot of dry air pushing in underneath this stuff too. So after you get through the wind shear, you've got a lot of dry air to contend with through the central and even parts of the northern Coral Sea now. Remember, we're no longer attached to a really strong monsoon, so therefore it makes it quite easy now for these highs in the Tasman to push in and push up dry air. Earlier today, Gillian was actually quite easy to have a look where she was, because you could see here, this is the convective signature right where my cursor is, and Gillian, I keep getting these mixed up, Gillian's centre lies just to the northeast of all that fairly deep convection, but you can see here some very deep thunderstorm activity associated with the system around about lunchtime today. And in the latest image, we actually see a lot of that really heavy storm activity is definitely being sheared away from the center of the system. The center of the system lies a lot further to the west than where this red, orangey, yellow cloud suggests it does. I guess the big issue holding this one back outside of the wind shear is the fact that it's now going to be located pretty close to the coastline over the next 24 to 48 hours as it tracks across to the NT region. So we can see Gillian here probably being shown a little bit too far to the west according to the satellite-derived wind estimates, but really overall it's too close to the coast now to deepen too significantly, so it needs to push back out here a little bit more to the east, and so if the low-level circulation centre can somehow get itself underneath that deep convection over the next 24 hours, we might actually see the potential for that to deepen into a TC, but really it needs to get away from the coast if it's going to deepen into anything more than a very, very weak Category 1. Now, on its approach here, it's basically going to push to the north or north-northwest and then northwest and then towards the west, just off the top end coastline here. So once again, it's constantly going to be it's constantly going to be hampered by the landmass, which is going to be right next to it the whole time. So if we take a look at a close-up of the GFS track modelling for this system, it does have it pushing a little bit more to the north-northeast. As I said, if it can get this far out, it does have that potential to develop into a Cat 1, a pretty decent Cat 1 if it can do this. Overall, the models aren't as enthusiastic as the GFS in doing so, but really you can see here a sharp recurve to the west-northwest, and then even to the west in the 5-day period. So getting pretty close to Darwin there by about day 3, around about the Sunday, around the top end coast, around the Tiwi Islands, getting very close to those places. So don't be surprised if you see a fairly big increase in rainfall as this system tracks across the top end coast, particularly in the Darwin area on the Sunday, maybe even the Monday as well, while it lies just offshore. If we look at the high-resolution FIM9 model, we can see, even though this is an experimental model, a very similar track here, a little bit to the north-northeast, which will allow it to develop a little bit over the next 24 to 48 hours, and then basically a track to the west. The difference here in the FIM model has the system right on the coastline through the whole period. Now, that obviously will limit the potential for any cyclone development, but what it will also do is possibly increase the potential for some heavy rain along the top end coast. So really, if it can stay just offshore, a lot of the heavy rain will stay offshore with it. If it can push just onshore like the FIM model is suggesting, then we're going to see some very heavy rain onshore on that top end coastline. So I guess even though it's a matter of only 50 or 100 kilometres, it does make a fairly big difference in the amount of accumulated rainfall you could see here over the next 3 or 4 days. So the system then tracks very, very close to the Coburg Peninsula, and then starts to track in a west-southwest direction after that. Obviously, a fairly large difference here in the UKMet model, which to date has really shown this system up very well. We see that the UKMet model drifts it basically to the north and then northwest. So because of that, it remains too close to the coastline to develop, and it then drifts it northwest and basically continues drifting it west-northwest the whole time. So if it lies this far offshore, Darwin won't see a single millimetre out of this thing, and we'll just continue getting those isolated showers and storms. But obviously, this is an outlying model at the moment. The reason we show it is because the UKMet has done so well with this system so far, and it's done so well with Hadi as well as Gillian. So really, this model is on fire. But at this stage, it is the northern outlier, so it's suggesting the system will continuing to track in a northwesterly direction. By the time it starts to track more to the west, it's way up here over East Timor, and a long way away from the top end. So this is not a good rainfall scenario for anyone outside of the northeastern top end. Anyone west of that is going to see nothing out of this if this model verifies. So if we check out the European model and the winds associated with the system tonight, we see the system remaining fairly weak out here in the western Gulf of Carpentaria. And if we have a look at some shear conditions over the system, we see that overall there's not too much shear at all over the system tonight. Despite what we're actually seeing on satellite, we are seeing the system being sheared away to the east on satellite, but the model is projecting that wind shear will decrease over the next 6 to 12 hours. As we see, relative humidity, though, is our issue. So what we have is a lot of dry air, and you can really see that dry air starting to push right in here. So this is our circulation, and what we have here is some dry air that's penetrating right into almost the center of circulation there, so it's really hampering the potential for development. Really what we need in a cyclone forming situation is we need these blues, particularly the blue from about 70 onwards. Even the 60 will do us, but if we get any less than 60% humidity in the mid-levels, so in about 3 to 5 kilometers above the atmosphere, if we get any less than 60% humidity levels there, relative humidity levels, we're not going to see development. We're not going to see the ability for the system to sustain the thunderstorms that it needs to sustain for the amount of time it needs to sustain them before it can strengthen. So that's what dry air does. It stops that ability for those storms to keep going overnight and then into the more than 12 hours or so. By tomorrow night, we see that the low has basically drifted in a north or north-northwest direction from the Euro, and once again, not developing significantly too close to land, folks. It's within 50 or 100 kilometres of land there, so it's just way too close, and it just can't form if it's going to be doing that. And once again, if we have a look at the relative humidity values around the system, we still see this dry air coming up northwards into the territory, really trying to penetrate into the circulation itself. It's just surrounded by too much dry air for it to really get itself cranking in terms of the thunderstorm activity it needs to. And as we look at wind shear values at around about the same time, we still see pretty good shear values. So shear isn't going to be the issue there. It's more going to be the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, and there's not enough of that this time around the Northern Territory. So as we head to 10 a.m. on Saturday, we see that the system has made or is about to be making landfall. You can see here that the winds remaining fairly moderate to fresh here, 20 to 25 knots. As we head to Saturday night, we see that the system has already made landfall here in the northeastern top end. If we look at some of the projected rainfall estimates there through Saturday, we can see that overall, the falls aren't going to be as heavy as I thought when I first started this broadcast, and the reason being is that dry air is really starting to penetrate around and to the south of the system. So really you need to be north of it or right over the track to be getting some rainfall, and you can see here that we're really only seeing moderate falls of rain. The heavy falls are remaining just to the north of the system because of that dry air over the territory at the time. Now you can see that those falls continually move to the west towards the Darwin area as we head towards Sunday. And if we track where the actual circulation will lie by Sunday morning, we will see that the circulation will lie just here around Maningrida, pushing to the west, but really it becomes a fairly broad and elongated surface feature here, and so there'll be a fair bit of disagreement as to where the circulation lies during that period, just because it's not a very clear circulation. Now, as we head to Monday morning, we see the system tracks off the Coburg into and around the Tiwi Islands, and then once again, if we look at most of the rainfall at the time, will likely remain offshore. So once again, because you're south of that, you're seeing some fairly dry air again. So if we look at the humidity values at around about Monday, you're still going to see some very dry air here across the territory. There is some more moister air now surrounding the system to the southeast, but still, if we track the system further to the west here, you can see over East Timor we're starting to see very dry air penetrating northwards and still trying to wrap around the system. So really, folks, it is battling dry air is the big issue with this system through the next few days. So don't get me wrong, we're not saying you're not going to get any rain. What we're saying is the amount of rain you're going to get is probably going to be less than what we would normally expect with a system like this. If this was attached to a really strong monsoon trough, you'd normally expect 2, 3, maybe even 400 millimeters in the vicinity of that system. Not with this one, folks. You're not going to see those sort of rainfalls with this one as it tracks westwards due to the amount of dry air around it. So as we head to Tuesday morning, we see the system continues tracking west. As we head to Tuesday night, we'll continue to see the system tracking in a westerly direction and starting to develop some stronger winds here on Tuesday night. So the potential to become a cyclone on Tuesday and Wednesday improves from this system, but there is almost zero chance of this system hitting the coast of WA when it does become a cyclone, if it does become a cyclone. Very little chance of it ever hitting WA, just because underneath it it's going to be basically smacked into or just smack bang on top of a fairly strong mid-level ridge. And if we have a look at what that looks like in the upper levels, we have a look at what this looks like in the upper levels. You can see here's the mid-level ridge, so right in here, and what that's going to do is it's just going to ensure that this system keeps tracking well away from the WA coast. Yes, it's going to produce some pretty decent conditions for its intensification, but no, that system is not coming towards WA, folks, not in any stretch of the imagination. With a high like this big in the mid-levels and located in this position, there is zero chance of this hitting the coast based on that projection. Now look, if that high somehow pushes a little bit more to the east, then we might be talking a very, very far western landfall here around Onslow, Exmouth, maybe Coral Bay, but at this point in time, with a high over there, folks, there is no other way this thing can go except this direction here. So this is what I mean when we talk about WA systems. It's not like a Queensland system which has 1,000 different things acting on it. This is pretty clear cut, and it's pretty clear cut on every single model guidance. Now that's not to say models can't be wrong, but when you start to see exactly the same setup in terms of the atmospheric flow in a lot of different model guidance, you can be pretty clear that it's not hitting the coast. Alright, so let's spend a couple of minutes now on the Queensland system, or the next Queensland system, or the past Queensland system that will become the next Queensland system, whichever way you want to look at it. This could be or could not be Ex Hadi, we're not sure, but basically the GFS model develops this low around between Vanuatu and Fiji, pushes it almost directly west and pushes it west pretty quickly and forms it into a tropical cyclone. We'll go through a little bit more of the longer term modelling from the GFS and the Euro on this shortly, but basically pushes it west, becomes a cyclone off the Queensland coast at day 5 or 6. The FIM9 model has a very similar setup where the system pushes from between Vanuatu and Fiji and pushes a little bit more to the south though, and becomes in a sort of west-southwest to southwest direction. Still develops it into a tropical cyclone here off the coast of Queensland, well off the coast of Queensland, and continues to push the system in a west-southwest direction in the longer term after that as well. No sign of a big upper trough at that point in time, so the system should continue pushing to the west. It's just a matter of, can it be strong enough to be a cyclone, or will it just be a low? At this stage, the FIM model is suggesting cyclone. The GFS is suggesting cyclone. The UK Met, very similar track here, pushing to the east, stopping in about 2 days' time, stopping, and then boom, once the brakes come off, it just accelerates westwards. But the big thing here to note in the UK Met model, it is a weak low. It is not a tropical cyclone on the UK Met. As it heads back in towards Australian waters, it remains a weak low. So, where is it? It's basically out here, the tropical low right now in the Euro model, and if we track it, I can't give you any high resolution without giving you an idea of how far offshore it is. As we track it towards the 48-hour mark, the Euro basically just keeps it as a trophy low here, pushes it a little bit further to the east, but then it really starts to stall there on day 2 and 3. So really, according to most of the guidance, it is going to remain Hadi or ex Hadi. It hasn't completely weakened and washed out, so it is there still in some capacity. Now at 72 hours, so on Sunday it stalls, and then by Monday we start to see the system just starting to track back towards the west on the Monday. And there it goes, back towards the west, back towards Vanuatu. And then as we track it through till Tuesday, you'll see the system track over the top of Vanuatu again and back in towards the Coral Sea, or the northeastern Coral Sea. It's not a very strong system, so now we can start to zoom in and have a little bit closer look at the winds around it. It's a very trophy-based system on the Euro, which is similar to what the UK Met is suggesting. Then as we head towards day 6, which is the Thursday, we continue to see the system tracking further west towards the northern Coral Sea, and then on Thursday night the system will continue to track towards the west. Now if we have a look at conditions in and around there, now these will change, but just for argument's sake, there is no wind shear in the northern Coral Sea. The northern Coral Sea will be free of wind shear, so there's no issue there, so conditions are all good to go there. And in terms of humidity though, it's not good at all, folks. There's a lot of dry air in the Coral Sea next week, so that's going to limit potential development there. But anyway, we're looking a long way ahead there, and there's a fair bit of model disagreement in how much dry air and how much wind shear. One of the key things the GFS does, remember, is it tries to spin things up a lot quicker than it should, and the GFS is spinning this up into a TC. And once again, if we look at why the GFS might be spinning that up into a TC around that time, we have, if we take a look at shear conditions, overall the GFS is suggesting moderate wind shear around the system, so moderate wind shear, and yet it's still intensifying the system that rapidly, so that already makes us skeptical that the GFS solution might be a little bit too aggressive. And if we look at the amount of moisture in the atmosphere at the time, the GFS2 continues to plague the Coral Sea with dry air, and yet still manages to develop a tropical cyclone. So we're pretty skeptical. You've got to be pretty skeptical on the GFS scenario, just because it doesn't make sense based on the environment around it. So we've got moderate wind shear followed by a lot of dry air in and around the circulation. So that leads us to believe that maybe the Euro model is a little bit more realistic in terms of keeping this a low pressure system, at least until next Wednesday, Thursday. Conditions do get better in the longer term modeling, but I'm not going to show you that because that changes too often. So this dry air does abate in the longer term modeling, but as I said, we'll keep an eye on that, and when that becomes a little bit more concrete, we'll show you some evidence of that. So tomorrow's rainfall across Australia, most of it remains offshore in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Some pretty decent falls starting to develop on the northeastern top end. Good shower and storm activity continuing for the northern top end, North Kimberley, and some showers along the Queensland coastline north of about Ingham. As we head to Saturday, we start to see some of that heavier rain making its way onto the northeastern top end and the Arnhem Land coastline, and then also starting to spread a little bit further to the west. We're going to see more general shower and storm activity across the rest of the northern top end. North Peninsula getting a fair bit of rain. That shower activity over the Queensland coast starts to weaken. On the Sunday, as I said, we're going to start to see a much bigger push of that heavier rain onto and further west on the top end coastline, with falls of possibly over 150 millimetres over 24 hours expected, or possible I should say. And then on the Monday we're probably starting to see the max rain potential for the Darwin area as we head to Sunday and Monday. Monday in particular, with falls of over 100 millimetres possible in the one day there, possibly just to the north of Darwin at this point in time. based on the current track. So total forecast rainfall for the next 4 days. Yeah, a lot happening over the northeastern top end, the Arnhem Land district, and eventually over the western top end. Not much happening anywhere in Queensland. A little bit of shower and storm activity over the North Kimberley. The 4 days after that, we see as the low or cyclone Gillian tracks westwards, takes all the rain away with it. And then we're left with pretty well dry conditions, some isolated shower and storm activity, Pilbara, Kimberley, into the inland Western Australian region, and some very isolated activity over Queensland. We do start to see evidence of Ex Hadi or the new circulation in Vanuatu pushing to the west there, and that's what leads to this build-up of activity out here in the Coral Sea. The 4 days after that will be very interesting as to whether that activity then comes towards the coast. Alright folks, thanks for watching tonight. We'll have another update tomorrow night. Good night.